Teachers of Reddit. What is the most disturbing thing your student has ever done? Story 1. I had a 5th grade student pick up 2 brick-sized rocks and try and stone another kid to death. Story 2. I used to teach a PE class to 3 to 5-year-olds. I had this one kid who used to come with his friend from kinder. His friend's mother apologized to me numerous times and said she never would have offered to bring him if she knew what he was like. More than once, I had to evacuate the rest of the kids from the gym because this 3-year-old would be running around the gym screaming the F word, the C word at the top of his lungs while trying to punch, kick, or headbutt other kids. You never knew what would set him off. If you asked him to kick a ball, he was equally likely to kick another student or the ball. One time, he went so violent that I couldn't get him away from the other kids and ended up wrapping him up in the firm cuddle technique, which they definitely don't teach teachers about anymore. I basically dropped him to his knees with me on my knees behind him, arms wrapped around his arms and chest. The only part he could move was his head, and he kept trying to smash the back of his head into my face. But the worst part was the laughter. He normally had a vague, empty look on his face, but when he was trying to hurt someone, he would scream with laughter wearing the biggest crap-eating grin. I only had him for 10 sessions once a week, but holy crap, I will never forget that kid. Story 3. One of my students in high school came in one day and handed me a pop vinyl figurine from one of her favorite bands. She said I could have it, and I, not used to random gifts, asked her why she was giving it to me. She said something along the lines of she didn't need it anymore. I thanked her and told her to have a good day. The following day, she offed herself. It immediately became clear why she didn't need the figurine anymore. That still bothers me. Story 4. I taught 3rd graders for a year, so the kids were around 9 years old. It was a couple of days before summer holidays, and I asked the kids what they were going to do during the summer. I got to this one girl and asked her what she was going to do, and she happily announced she was going to Germany with her sister and parents. I asked her what she was going to do in Germany, and she said she was going to ask people if they have €1. I was like, what? And she proceeded to sit down on the floor with a really sad look on her face, stuck her hand out to me and said, "See, like this. Please, miss, do you have just €1? I'm hungry." She didn't really see anything wrong with this. I'm pretty sure she didn't really understand what she was doing. I was quite alarmed by this, so I informed the other school staff. It turned out that even though they weren't actually poor, her parents were regularly taking their 2 daughters to Germany over summer, where they would make them beg for money in the streets. I heard the girl and her sister got pulled out of school shortly after that, but I don't know what happened after, since I don't work there anymore. Story 5. Back when I was a teacher, one of my students randomly started punching another kid, who was his friend, in the middle of class with no provocation whatsoever. The puncher was into bodybuilding, and pretty in shape, and he had never been violent before in school, so this was both surprising and hard to break up considering his size. He broke his friend's nose and was smiling after. Had no idea what he did was weird or upsetting. Story 6. I recently had one of my students tell a pregnant teacher that he wanted to punch her in the stomach. Another student said, "You can't do that, she's pregnant." The first student then said, "That's the point." These are 5th graders. This is also in a school that rarely has behavioral problems, so this was quite a shock. Story 7. I teach 4-year-olds part-time, which means I usually do art and recreation in the afternoons. There's this girl in my class. Let's call her Mary, who is a tiny terror that frequently runs around making other kids cry. Her moves are very calculated. A hair pull, kicking a toy over, snatching art. She waits until the other child is crying before she relents. She never wants the toy, just the reaction. On the other hand, this boy, Jim, is her polar opposite and often the voice of reason in my class. He's a gentle giant, the biggest kid in preschool. He shares happily, is kind during playtime, and is probably the most thoughtful human I've ever met. Well, one day during outside time, Mary kept targeting Jim. He was pretty good-natured the whole time. She would snatch a shovel from him and he would respond kindly by saying, "It's okay, you can have it. Toys are for sharing." Stuff like that. Sidebar. Remember those giant red and yellow cars that kids sit in and pedal with their feet? The yard has 5 for the kids to share. Mary was leaning against the wall, and Jim pushing one of those cars. The kids like running around with them, so that was normal. Jim was probably a good 30 feet away from her when he suddenly started accelerating. He was aimed like a homing missile, pointing straight at poor, clueless Mary. Genuinely believed he would turn away at the last minute or stop. I was wrong. He slammed the car right into Mary, effectively crunching her against the wall. I'll never forget how long it took her to inhale. I was shaking. I thought he cracked her ribs. Her entire back was bruised, but thankfully, no further damage. I was too shocked to be angry. After passing Mary to my co-teacher, I turned to Jim, who was sulking in the corner, and asked, "Why did you do that?" He just shrugged and very calmly said, "I was just trying to take care of our problem." 100% scared of this kid now. Story 8. I was a preschool teacher at the time. I was doing group time, singing songs, reading a book, and all the kids were sitting on the floor. One left to blow her nose. She came back, walked through the crowd of kids to get back to her spot, grabbed the quiet girl's hair, and kept walking. My assistant thought it was a mistake, but the girl kept walking. She even bent at the knees and yanked, while the poor long-haired girl screamed. That girl had no remorse and would be so unpredictable. She would look in your eyes, but right through them. It was a stressful year. Story 9. At the first school that I taught at, I had a girl come up to me one day and say, "Robert has a knife." I pulled Robert into the hallway to talk with him about it. He said that he didn't have a knife, but did have a box cutter. I asked him why he had it, and he said, "Because I'm tired of Chris." Chris was an annoying suck-up, but wasn't really bad or mean to other kids. I asked Robert what he was planning on doing to Chris. He said, "I am going to get him in the bathroom." I usually took the class to the restroom after lunch, but I didn't that day because they were being rowdy in the hallway. I took Robert to the office, and after hearing the story, the principal chewed him out. She then called Robert's mom, and she chewed him out on the phone. Here's the kicker. Robert knew that he was in serious trouble. He knew that what he was planning was wrong. He just didn't care. Not in a false bravado macho type was, he literally didn't care. I hate to predict a kid's future criminal endeavors, but that kid scares me. By the way, Robert was 8 years old at the time. Story 10. I taught college. I taught mostly seniors and grad students. I had to essentially sit with a disturbed student in my office and keep him talking as campus police searched his office and workstation. The kid made threats against other students, and the students waited to tell me until it got really bad. When I intervened, he started threatening me. Like on my personal cell phone, personal email, stuff like that. My husband told me to tell campus police, which I did, but everyone told me there was nothing really they could do. The chair of my department couldn't even kick him out of my class because he was enrolled through a different department. His home department was too slow to do anything. I called a meeting with him to ostensibly talk things out, but I had told my TA to search his stuff. My TA immediately called campus police, who went with him to search those areas. They found some stuff in his office, enough to kick him out of school, but nothing that rose to criminality. Well, that is until he brandished the gun that was in his backpack. This happened as he stepped out of my office and my TA and campus police stood there. I watched the campus cop literally tackle him off his feet. Story 11. I used to teach at an alternative high school, so a lot of my students were kids on probation. Kids from areas with a lot of gang violence. Many of them had issues related to the fact that they were born drug addicted. That kind of thing. I had a student who I had worked hard with to build a good rapport. One Friday, he looked me in the eyes and told me, completely calmly, that I shouldn't come to work on Monday. He kept telling me that he didn't want me to be there Monday. When I finally pressed him for why I should not come to work Monday, he told me that he was going to blow this crap up. I said, "You know I need to report this, right?" He told me to do what I had to do. He was arrested right out of my classroom, and I had to be interviewed by the police. It was honestly really traumatic. I ended up calling out Monday, even though I knew nothing was going to happen because my anxiety went through the roof. I called out a lot after that and found a new job shortly after. But I still have a great deal of compassion for that student. I think about him often. I hope he's okay. Story 12. Middle school English teacher. I had a student pull a tooth out of his own head to get out of silent reading. It was a baby tooth, thank God, but according to mom, it was not loose. He just sat at his desk and grabbed it and yanked it back and forth and popped it out, and came up to the desk bleeding all over himself and said he wasn't able to read anymore, so he could just put his head down. He was sent to the nurse and mom was horrified. Story 13. I had a 5th grader who I swore was sociopathic. His father had deported the boy's mother because he wanted a new wife. If that gives some context to the living situation. The boy would say very aggressive, sexual things. Moon students on the bus, etc. But the predatory behavior was the worst. He'd wait as students left the room so he could be the next to last, turn off the light, and backhand the last kid in line, often his own cousin who was his most common victim. I had to keep an eye on him constantly. He'd also steal electronics and things from his friends, or force his cousin to do so in case they were caught. P.S. Yes, CPS was involved. This was almost a decade ago, so I'm not sure what happened to him. Story 14. I was a supervisor for a special program that involved about 20 students that were expelled from other schools. Most of them were known gang members. The program had a strict no bandana policy. One day, Kid 1 stole Kid 2's cigarettes, while Kid 2 was in an office session about his homework. We found out later that Kid 1 thought it was hilarious and was laughing about it. Kid 2 goes for his smokes during break and can't find them. He proceeds to flip out and starts screaming about how he's going to F someone up. No one admitted it. We de-escalated the situation and later took him to the store to buy a new pack for him. A few days go by and Kid 1 gets ratted out by another student who was in the same gang as Kid 2. We didn't know any of this was going on at the time. One afternoon, during a group session, we would have them sit in a circle during some lessons instead of at desks. And out of nowhere, these two boys jump up and yell, "Yo, Kid 1!" as they literally run at him and proceed to beat him up right in front of everyone until the staff broke it up. All 3 got expelled after that, and I have no idea what happened to them. Although I can imagine some scenarios based on how committed they were to gang life. Story 15. I had a girl who couldn't be in the classroom and had to be on a one-on-one with me at all times. But she couldn't be in the classroom because she was extremely violent and deliberately stabbed another child in the eye with a colored pencil, then laughed about it. The other child had to be hospitalized. When we asked her why she did it, she started laughing again and said, "Because I wanted to." She would also randomly attack kids on the playground and in the halls. When they put her on a one-on-one with me, and she couldn't do that anymore, she started attacking me on a daily basis. She was 4. Story 16. A kid tried to hold the classroom hostage by pulling a box cutter. He immediately started making crazy demands. Before security could even arrive, a big kid pushed him down, grabbed the box cutter right out of his hands and said, "Quit being an a-hole." Then sat right back down for the lesson to continue. Story 17. I've taught some university courses on occasion. One student comes to mind immediately. She was in a class of mine that was on an accelerated condensed schedule. As such, an absence of more than half a class period meant you couldn't pass, as there were mandated percentages. She was very late a few times. I let it slide since she was fairly intelligent and normally caught up quickly. But we had a chat about how important it was she get there on time. Finally, she just didn't show up at all for 3 class periods. Basically, there was no way in hell she could pass the class due to that, and she missed enough content that she would be far behind. So, she comes in and sits down like normal after that. I didn't try to help her catch up as she didn't speak to me or ask for assistance. So when things are over and done with, she comes in one day while I'm with another group wanting to know why I failed her. I pointed out her attendance and content she missed. She blew the final, etc. She starts giving me excuses about broken down cars and so on. She could have emailed or called. Nothing. Then, she's screaming at me that I'm ruining her life and she won't graduate. When I pointed out that I was very clear and that she made zero effort to work with me, she literally stepped forward and pulled her fist back, ready to lay one on me. She made one last demand which I refused. By that time, someone walking by, I had stepped out of the classroom, saw her actions and asked if there was a problem. I wasn't concerned. I'm a pretty solid guy and she was a smaller woman. She simply wouldn't take any responsibility for her actions. She eventually wrote everyone at my school trying to get around me and or get me into trouble. No go. I had complete support. Story 18. I was hired as a child and youth worker to shadow just one 9-year-old boy. He had a history of touching other kids and was allowed by our school board to continue attending school as per his rights, but only if he was constantly observed by an adult hired by the board. It was a pretty intense job. The kid knew I was watching him and he was constantly trying to manipulate every adult and child in his path. He had absolutely creepy eyes and personality. He eventually transferred out of that board into another one in the same area. I was working at that other school/board in another capacity and saw him attending at that school. He was visibly shocked to see me. I immediately went to the principal and asked to speak to him privately and off the record, as due to administrative issues, I was breaking legal confidentiality of the student by talking about him. But I felt it was my duty to protect the other students, as he was definitely not being observed or shadowed at this new school. Turns out the new admin and principal at the school had no idea of his past history. Due to his age and other factors, his record from the first school board was wiped clean. I was well respected and they believed me, and they unofficially had him observed from then on, and also excused him from the standard requirement to go to the bathroom with another student. I also worked with another group of 5 underage siblings at the first school board who were all HIV positive, but it was their legal right to have their medical status kept private. The siblings would regularly threaten other students, hit them, fight them, etc. And yes, other students' skin was broken and blood potentially exchanged on occasion. I had to tell the parents to treat their injured kids as if they had potentially contracted any number of unknown viruses or bacteria, as per the school board administration rules.